About congregationalism and the church. Um, I don't think it's that well known, but Joe Wing, that comes from England, has authored this Harvest and Hope, which is the history of the start of congregationalism. And what is interesting, the Mayflower left England for the New World. The missionaries that came to South Africa were also aboard a ship, but it was the Heilbrow ship in 1799, and it was a convict ship that was en route to Australia and to Botany Bay. And they were just conveniently passengers on the boat, and they disembarked in Algoa Bay. That's the start. Now there are two strands. I'm first going to focus on the London Missionary Society, the current Council for World Mission. It was first called the Missionary Society. You would know better. And then I'll touch on the American Board Mission. And the first people that came out was a medical doctor, Dr. van der Kemp, and there was a Johannes Kitchener that was Dutch. So the first people came. The first people that came were Dutch, but also English. There was John Edmonds and William Edwards. These two were skilled carpenters sent by the London Missionary Society, and at the outset, I need to say they started with education, schools. Bethelsdorp was the first mission station, and they actually paid for the land. The land belonged to farmers, and the London Mission Society bought the land so that it could become a mission station. The church still stands to this day, and the small house that the minister lived in still stands to that day, to this day. And the mission work carried on beyond that. If one look at the distances, they had to travel then on horseback and cart. It really could only have been commitment and love of God and love to spread the gospel. The British and Dutch, South Africa was under Dutch rule at the time, before it became a British colony. So they were well received. They were given land, and they were allowed to continue with the work. From Algoa Bay, they went to Graafrenet. Many of these British names, Port Elizabeth, Graafrenet. What would Graafrenet be? It would be Lord Reinet, a Graaf, a title of honor. And then from Bethelsdorp as well, Uitenhage became an outstation just outside of Algoa Bay, Port Elizabeth, and Kruisfontein was also a mission station, and schools were erected in all of these places. And over and above schools in Port Elizabeth, which was then Algoa Bay, they started a teachers training college, which was called Dower Training College, named after one of the ministers, Reverend Dower, teaching the schools, and obviously the teachers training college, but also artisans were trained. The farmers were not well disposed towards the missionaries, because while the native people of the area, and I'm not using a derogatory, while they were being schooled, these farmers were unschooled. And so a compromise was reached that all of the children could be trained at those schools, and they were allowed to proceed. And from there, they went to the Southern Cape, Oudtshoorn, where the world-renowned Kangu caves are. That's called Outeniqua, which is a Griqua name. Pakkelsdorp, the Reverend Pakkels, or most of the towns and churches were named after personalities. And so work was started in Pakkelsdorp as well, and then all the way in Cape Town. The eldest church is Union Chapel in Cape Town, in Sea Point. So education was an important part. But at that time, there were also other missionaries coming. The Dutch sent out missionaries. There were Swedish missionaries. There were Rhenish missionaries. There's a very good school in Stellenbosch, not far away from where we met. That is a Rhenish girls school, which was started as a school for the missionary children. And one of the Rhenish ministers a year or two ago did research on that and shared it with the school, and they were not aware of its history. By the same token, there's an Afrikaans school called Paul Roos, because the university where we met, Stellenbosch, first started as a seminary. The Paul Roos School was established to train all of the children of the ministers. So you had the Rhenish school, a mission school, and then you had also Paul Roos, which now are very exclusive schools and in very high demand. Further north, now this they had to get permission from the British authorities and the Dutch. But as the missionary work went further north, they had to negotiate with the tribal leaders. And one of these was Mzilikatsi. This was very close to Botswana. You will remember the name Moffat, Robert and Mary Moffat. They started the Moffat Mission in Kuruman. And he left for England again and came back with a printing press. But what he did was he printed the first Tswana Bible in England and brought the press down together with Phillips. That was in April of 1820. Moffat learned the language, and he could relate and preach in the vernacular. His wife Mary died, and she's buried in that Moffat mission. And as a matter of interest, our very first General Secretary, Joe Wing, that authored this book, was his desire also to be laid to rest in the Moffat mission. And that was not too long ago. We attended that. So these were difficult times. There were doctors were not around, and it may have been. I can't imagine what Mary may have died of. But then they met up with David Livingstone, and one of the missionaries that came out to work did not find the African culture and climate conducive enough, and so he left. But when Moffat went back to England for the printing press, he met up with David Livingstone, who was supposed to have gone to China as a missionary, and he was persuaded to come to South Africa, and he joined Moffat with a work in South Africa. Not at the same time, but the Americans also sent missionaries to what was called Port Natal, which is Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. Let me first go back to Algoa. Most of the work and the money came from England. The ministers were paid, and it's not that not much was expected of the people, but they were well funded from England. The Americans had a different stance. They bought glebe lands. Now Africans could not at the time, black Africans at the time could not buy property. So they bought glebe lands in the name of the American Board Mission, and they allowed farmers to farm sugarcane on these glebe lands. They were also good on education, as well as health. They erected a hospital that stands to this day, a teaching hospital called McCord's. And they trained most at early days Zulu, because that's a predominant people in Durban, as you would know. You've been there. They were trained as nurses, and doctors were sent from America. So McCord's was a strategic and training college. But one of the missionaries, Adam Grout, started work further south, and that area is still called Groutville. Now, Albert Lutuli, Chief Albert Lutuli, a congregational a deacon at the time, when he became um, he was part of the church, and in fact, his burial took place at Groutville. So that was a mission station as well. A school was started, and important work continued there as well. Later on, the Gleblands, this is quite recently, about probably 2 decades ago, the Gleblands were sold, and KwaZulu-Natal region, most of the regions are autonomous. They could sell, and the government bought the land, and they made big money. And so they could build other churches and fix up the churches and do the institutional work. Now, as recently as 1967, now you've got the Congregational Union of South Africa. That is Algoa Bay, Port Elizabeth, Cape Town, and most of the colored work, and also the white work, Congregational Union. And then you had the American Board Mission. Then you had the LMS, the London Missionary Society. And then the fourth strand was the Bantu Congregational Church, which in the old apartheid years, Bantu referred to black. So on the 3rd of October 1967, these four strands got together, united, and formed the United Congregational Church of Southern Africa, including Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Namibia, and South Africa. The church, that's the good side of it. The downside now is that what was once a very proud, opinion-forming church has, and that contributed a lot to the country, as they did in America with the universities and schools, has really declined to a very small congregation with not a big footprint. And maybe it's not only congregational. I think churches generally, for example, the Anglican Church always prided themselves in appointing bishops, but there are quite a few of the what do they call it, the dioceses. They are not able to choose and elect bishops. They don't find clergy that are educated and mature enough to do that. So maybe it's a general decline. I know the Dutch Reformed Church certainly is declining as well. So it's cleansing time for renewal, but the church still continues to stand.